Muslim presence behind all of the things that we're trying to do, because it's much easier for people to believe us when we say that Tarek is innocent if they see fellow Muslims standing next to us than if all they see are people who have nothing in common with Tarek but are courageous enough to help standing next to us. So we appreciate their efforts, and we invite anybody else who has the courage to help out as well to join us. And we'd be very open to anybody who wishes to join. I'd like to clarify in terms of the charges that Tarek has been facing. Again, when he was first arrested initially back in October 21st of 2009, there was a media frenzy that accompanied his arrest, and recently I sent out on Facebook a message clarifying exactly what his charges were based on, because I've been getting a number of inquiries as to what exactly he started being charged with, what's going on here. There's a lot of confusion, and again, like I said, I myself was confused about it. So again, the media frenzy was essentially based around this story that Tarek was intending to acquire firearms, to go to a mall and to open fire on random people. A very violent crime, a crime that no sane individual would want to have anything to do with. Tarek's a pretty sane individual. He's also a pretty intelligent person. I think that if his goal was to acquire firearms, considering that, young teenagers and adolescents in the hood are able to acquire guns, considering that children at Columbine have no problem acquiring guns from Kmart, I don't really think Tarek would have had any difficulty in acquiring any weapons. So I find it kind of, on its face, it's a pretty ludicrous claim. But it gets even more ridiculous when you look at Tarek's affidavit. And the affidavit, essentially, it's a lengthy legal document that outlines, briefly the evidence that's being brought forth, and it lists the charges that are being formally brought against Tarek. And it's really peculiar, it's very peculiar that when you look at that list of charges, there's nothing whatsoever pertaining to obtaining firearms, pertaining to going to a mall to shoot people, or to government officials, nothing whatsoever. So you see, you observe that the media plays on this whole story about a violent plot to kill people without any goal whatsoever. And yet, when you look at the legal side of it, there's nothing at all that corresponds to that. So you ask yourself, why would they do something like that? And the only logical answer to that is that they wish to slander his character and hope that people would not do the due diligence of checking out the affidavit for themselves and discovering that there is no correlation between the stories that we see circulated and what he's being charged with. So before I get to what he's actually being charged with, I'd just like to point out that this is actually a trend that we see in many of the major cases that have emerged, including Afia Sadiqi's, including a number of others. So, let's all try to be conscientious and try to do our homework with this stuff, because what we're told is a very different story than what reality presents to us. That said, the charges that Tarek is being faced with right now are a number of false testimony charges, similar to those which were brought against him in 2008, similar essentially to charges that nothing has come of so far. Those are fairly weak allegations, which is why, it seems that we're observing acceleration of their, or more aggressive tactics being used right now, because the false testimony charges, they don't seem to hold much weight. Inshallah, the court process will tell. I'm sure we can have a lot of faith in that. But the most significant charge being brought against Tarek is what they call material support for terrorism, conspiracy to provide material aid to terrorism. And it sounds It sounds like a really condemning act. It sounds like a really condemning act, assuming, of course, that he was guilty of it. But if we look at it more closely, we can see that it relates to a clause from the Patriot Act. And if you look at the Patriot Act clause, you see that their definition of material support is extremely broad and vague. It's very, very broad, and it's intentionally so that any number of things could fall into it. You know, like it encompasses anything from advice to material support to promoting any of their activities. In fact, the first group that was charged under this clause of the Patriot Act was an American non-Muslim group, and they were providing aid to the Tamil Tigers of Sri Lanka, which the United States government lists as a terrorist organization. So this charity organization was trying to teach the Tamil Tigers how to achieve their objectives in non-violent ways through legitimate political channels, essentially how to lobby for their objectives without needing to use violence to achieve their goals. You know, one would assume, I mean, that's essentially teaching a quote-unquote terrorist group not to engage in terrorism. You know, you would think that would be a good thing. However, the government clearly felt otherwise, and now that group is being prosecuted for providing material aid to a terrorist organization. So that's a curious situation in and of itself, and it makes you wonder, perhaps there's an agenda where they would wish for this group to consider or to continue behaving in a terrorist fashion and to continue being considered as a terrorist group. But I digress. So going back to Tarek's case, his charge of conspiracy to provide material support to terrorism is really based on his, he would engage frequently in an activity where he thought it was a great collector of rare Islamic texts. And one of the things he would do with these texts is that he would translate them into English, and he would put these on his blog so that they would be available to those who either were not fluent in Arabic or who could not gain access to those books themselves. And so this material support for terrorism is based on him translating a number of books that to varying degrees touched upon the issue of jihad, that inflammatory word. You know, so regardless of the fact that Tarek did not advocate violence against innocent people in any shape or form, in fact, Tarek spoke out sharply against violence against innocent people. The fact that, you know, for example, one of the books titled The 39 Ways of Jihad was one of the books that he translated. That is what the FBI is trying to latch onto, and the prosecution is trying to employ as their vehicle for a charge of providing material aid to terrorism. Essentially that by alleging that he is trying to promote violence because he's translating these books that in some shape or form, to varying degrees, touch upon the issue of jihad. So I hope that just clarifies the fact that there has been no charges whatsoever at all, pertaining to any plot to acquire firearms and go to some mall and shoot people. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. At the very least, I would expect that they would come up with a more sophisticated story for somebody who has a doctoral degree and is so much of a threat that they have to bring all of these charges against him. But again, if we look at it, if we dissect it even on the most basic and superficial of levels, we can see that it really doesn't hold much water, and it's not at all connected to the legal process that's following them right now. So I hope that if we think about that, it can be easier for us to step forward and support Tarek and look into other people's cases like Tarek's without fearing that we're aligning ourselves with somebody who may have committed this or that. I mean, if the people who